Yeah, it's fine. So today we talk about the web services communication. So how to download information from the server or REST API, or how to upload a data to the server from iOS application. So what are the API classes which are responsible to do a client server communication from a mobile application in iOS? For a client server communication, there is a URL system has been developed by the Apple. Those API classes is responsible like nsurl session and nsurl connection. These two are the API classes which do the client server communication on the REST API level. It's not a socket based, which works with a REST communication. Either it can be HTTP or HTTPS or FTP, or so these kind of protocols it works with. So if it is coming to socket, then that is different. Like the socket communication we do with the different frameworks, but for these protocols, HTTP or networking protocol things, we can Apple is given these two API classes. This nsurl connection and nsurl session. So the API nsurl connection is the API which used up to iOS 7.0. So up to 7.0 there is a nsurl connection API we used for this to upload or download some information, or to make a client server communication. But nsurl session is started from 7.0 onwards. It is an advanced API compared to nsurl connection, and there are certain things they clarified in simple way with nsurl session compared to nsurl connection. They given a more features to user or the developer to make the things easier with nsurl session. So let's see what are the major differences between these two APIs and how to utilize the nsurl session. So we'll talk about nsurl session based client server communication. So in nsurl connection, let's have some details about this nsurl connection as well. So this is URL loading mechanism and policies which followed with this nsurl connection. We see when you do any client server communication, we keep words in our mind. So what can be the URL data loading and downloading? So here it supports for file system and HTTP and HTTPS and data protocols. So these kind of four protocols can be supported with this, and it's very extensible via the nsurl protocol. So it's follow the nsurl loading mechanism and policies. It's having a URL policies. So there is an API class which used to configure your request format. So if you go with HTTP protocol, HTTP protocol is itself is having one structure, because every protocol will have its own style of representation. If it is SMTP, let's take an example of a Gmail or Yahoo Mail or any mail system. If it is follows the SMTP protocol, the protocol is mandated to have a to and CC and subject and text like a body and attachment. So it follows the one specific format. That format is a unique and it's a global for SMTP. So similarly, if we talk about HTTP protocol should follow one structure where it should have a URL, and it should have a host, and it should have a request, it should have some header fields, and it should have a body, and it should have some header fields and body, and these kind of things it's mandatory. So how you are wrapping one object creation with an HTTP protocol, it follows its own structure. Similarly, HTTPS and data as well. So for this request processing, we use nsurl request or nsurl mutable request. There are the two classes are responsible to make any request creation in objective-C. Let's see how we use nsurl connection. So nsurl connection will have a nsurl request, and the nsurl request will use to for configuring the, let's say, nsurl request will be configured in nsurl connection. So this nsurl connection will have a delegate one protocol. So nsurl connection will have a certain protocols. Those protocols will have a certain methods which describes how the URL system is working if it is executed with nsurl connection. Whether is your request is successfully reached to server, either user server is responding for your request, or are you getting the data, or you get any error, or whether the data download is finished. So before doing any data download or before sending a request to the accepted by the server may ask you some authentication. It can be your basic authentication. So how this is working? So this all the events is organized in a better way with a NSURL connection delegate protocols. So these delegation protocols, it gives a control to the developer to provide a necessary information while you are uploading or getting a information from my server. So the configuration is done with URL request and the connection is done with NSURL connection class. So this connection class will have a delegate. Let's see how exact it works. Request is captured by the connection. Through NSURL connection will send either a synchronous request or synchronous request to global storage objects which stored in your server side. And once the data is responded, so always if you upload an information or if you download an information, the data should be in a binary format. So the binary format is represented in objectiveC with NS data API. So I'm giving a URL request to connection. The connection is sending the data to the server and it fetches some information from the server in binary format and it will respond it with NSURL response. So these are the two API classes, NSURL request and response. The request is for to making a request, response is for which gives the responsive object from the server. So such a way the NSURL connection make a communication for your server. So the connection will have a delegate. So how exactly it works? So this is where you can create one either any request in a different format. Either it can be get request or it can be post or it can be put or it can be like any kind of protocol. It's like it's related to your HTTP URL system. URL protocol, you apply a URL protocol and you will use the NSURL connection to send it to your server. And if the server is responded well, so either you can get some, if it is 200, the status means your response is success, means your server is able to catch the information which is sent from the your NSURL connection. And if it is, if you got 404, then we can say there is a client request error, means your request was not properly sent to your server. If you got some 500 and above errors, then we can say that there is a server error. Either your server side, their code may be the fault with their server side API, or it can be there is some wrong with the services. So those kind of things like we can identify based on your error codes. If it is 400, we can say like we have to check in our code. If it is 500, then you can say the backend guys needs to check their code, what has happened. If you got 200, then it means it's everything goes well. So that's where like you use NSURL connection. So connection will store some information in your local system. It's like your device. It uses your disk device where you can store the cache information or you can store your cookies which is coming from the request. Because when you make any URL system, the URL system mostly will talk about storage of cookies or cache memory storages like cache data, and these kind of things will be there. So this all the information will be stored in your disk, disk space where you can store with NSURL connection. Because connection is defined such a way, the API itself is designed so where you can allow the caches, or where if you want to store the caches, you can allow to store the caches. So what this NSURL, so that's where your NSURL connection works. So how it works, if you see, there's a simple one, the NSURL connection. So both technology specific class replace NSURL and reserve existing concepts and objects. This is a different concept. So let's talk about this is where the NSURL connection, you go present API is NSURL session. So how this NSURL session is different from an NSURL connection? So this is one of the interview question. So both APIs are are used for the same to make a client server communication. The purpose is same for the both APIs. So the difference in terms of URL system, the way of classification, like either uploading or downloading. So based on your task, in NSURL connection, everything is a single task. Either you upload some data, or to download some data, or to fetch some image data, or to upload an image data. So whatever the request is, the approach is same. It should follow the single approach. When as NSURL session, they defined it the different tasks. They classified into different parts. If you want to download only raw data, it's some binary text data, then you can use, there is one API specific to that. Or else I would like to download a huge data which having an image data, something like that, there is a different task for it. I want to upload some data to the server, so you can do that. It's like text based or image based or file based. So they classified into different APIs. Again, there are certain APIs or subclasses for NSURL session through which we can we can use based on our purpose. So which is it's like one of the uh, best approach compared to NSURL connection. So this is like preserves an existing concepts and objects. Whatever NSURL connection is having, the same which we can do with NSURL session as well. So apart from that, it's having its own configuration uh, approach. So before we create NSURL session, we can define it. So how we need that configuration. And like private storage and subclassables, and authentication is also you can improve, and request authentications, and it will also be a block level and delegation mechanism, the NSURL session. So we can do that. NSURL session is like uploads in a different way and downloads is a different way through file system. Here we can see that uploads and downloads through the file system. That is one of the best approach with NSURL session. And what it encourages, you can do the metadata binding for request and responses. So the NS one is the major advantage with session and connection. So if your application is suspended, means you minimized your application. So then your app will go for background state. If there is some service is you are downloading some information with NSURL connection, if the user is send your app to background, so the download will be stopped. But whereas if you use a NSURL session, still you can do your data download in a background mode, even if your application is suspended. So this kind of one of the best features they added with NSURL session compared to NSURL connection. So it's like out of process uploads and downloads. So out of process means it's handled with your OS, and use same delegate model and process for transfers, and optimizing the battery life. With this API they optimize some battery life, and it still supports multitasking. So how this URL session works. First you have to configure your session, and the configuration contains caches, cookies, or what the things you want. You have to do all configuration into your NSURL session object. Before you create a session object, you have to configure it how exactly you want. So the configuration means either your session wants to store cache or wants to store cookies. So how exactly you want, either you want to store something on your data, or you don't want to save anything. So you would like to make every time is like a new request. So what do you want? So there is such kind of configuration you have to do before creating a session object. So the session is itself is have one protocol. So the protocol will give you the same control whether how the URL system is working. If you hit one service to server, whether your request is reached or not reached. If it is reached, so whether your server is responded or not. If it responds, so how much data is downloaded, what is the size of your data, where you are, whether is it finished downloading or it's get an error. So these kind of tracking you can get it, the delegation of, so these all the methods are hidden in your NSURL session delegate. So let's see so how it works. It's the same, like approach will be same, but the classifications are different from NSURL session to NSURL connection. So the objective is same, but the way of implementation and the handling is different. Either let's say there is some service, get service. You can use nsurl session to make it. So what this nsurl session? So as I said, it's having one session configuration, and H2P policies, and you can cache, and you can use the credential storage and cookie storage and cache storage. So there is nsurl session task. So this is one of the API. As I said, unit of work for session, you can define in different units. So those kind of things we can do. nsurl session delegate, it's having nsurl session. You can create with configuration option delegates. So how you can create a session? This is where your connection object creation.
Hello.
Yes.
Can you go to the previous slide?
Yeah. This one.
So
these are like different API classes. So that we can discuss later. That's not a deal.
No, I have one question. Create one nsurl task per request.
Yeah.
Explain that little bit.
So it's like for each request you can create one task. For example, there is a task of downloading data, or there is a task of uploading data. So you can use the nsurl session task. It's like multi-threaded. So it's run your thread in the background to do it parallel to your UI tasking.
For every task, there will be a separate service, or
if like every task, it creates a new instance. Your nsurl session will create a new instance for every upload or every service hit. If there are 4 services, REST APIs, you would like to consume, then it will create 4 tasks for it. You will create 4 objects, task objects. So each task is related to one service.
oh, okay.
So it's the same. So the structure it's like the unit of work is defined in terms of task here, because anyhow that is your task, right? Downloading data is one task. If we have 4 services, if you are downloading 4 requests, then there are 4 tasks.
Okay.
So that is
And
the
can we download the data from 4 different services at the same time?
You can start it, because same time means it's a multi-threading. We can include in the multi-threading. That's not a deal, right? We have threads.
Okay.
Because here it cannot do something like in multi-threading I want, but you have to make it. If you call the same thing on your threads, then if you fired 4 threads, then this is multi-threading. So you will get 5 objects which done in the background.
Okay.
So they define the session API into different tasks. So they call it as like a nsurl session task. So the session task can be related to your data task. It's like it's only downloading some data, some string data. It's either it be JS, JSON or XML. So such kind of data. There is some upload task, means you want to upload one JSON data to server, or you would like to upload one image data to your server or video data to server. So then there you need a file system which needs to run for a long period of time. So then they made it in different ways. Every time you need to go with a single API call. So to check it whether is it image data or is text data. So they simplified. They given some certain internal protocols to improve your performance if you go with nsurl session. Previously, nsurl connection is the only one class you will utilize to do any operation, either it's related to data or it's related to binary like image data or video data or text data, whatever it is, we use the same API class. So once you go for it, then your bandwidth or internal buffering will vary. So it's all the things needs to be managed in more. But when coming to nsurl session, they configure certain classes. These classes you can use for the data. These classes you can use for image data upload, or these classes you can go for download upload. Because when you are downloading, sometimes it's take more time. the user he may not wait for a long period of time. So he can minimize your application, still he wants the download should run in the background. How your background system is works at your Windows, like your system like laptop or any OS operating system. Similar way they can expect it, right? In the mobile app also, even if I
Yeah.
minimize my mobile app, I want the download should done in the background. That feature was not there with nsurl session, nsurl connection. So but
Okay.
they made this nsurl session, you can use one task which we can use for background download.
Okay. So the method will be almost same, but for every task they have different classes, which will
Yes,
improve the speed of the downloading or whatever it
it's
is.
related to, for example, you want something, you want to download something which needs to run in the background as well, or else
Yeah.
sometimes you need I don't want any background download for this service. If the user is open in foreground mode, I want to download. If you go for Facebook app, it won't do something in a background download. If you minimize something, it won't do still downloading in background. If you open it again, then it will do the streaming. Means if your
Yeah.
application is active, it go for streaming. If the user is sent in a background, then it won't go for streaming, because
Yeah.
it's based on the basic design of your app. If your application is related to banking or something else, so if you do some transaction, if you minimize it, sometimes if they want to allow, then you should have one API class which do the some task in the background download. For example, you are downloading a PDF file or some newspaper, so you should, the application should allow you to do it in background download, because if you do for the four PDF pages, you can select four PDF pages to download at the background. So these kind of things, it depends on your the design, like objective of the application. So based on it, we should check which API we have to use.
Yeah. Right. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So how it works for NSURL connection earlier? So let's see some bit of sample. So first you have to specify your URL. NSURL, there is one of the API class which used to check with your URL. So URL with string, you can specify your URL string here. Either whatever is HTTPS protocol or HTTP protocol, you can convert that string to URL. So later you have to make a request. So as I said, the HTTP will follow one architecture. It's like it should have some header fields, or it should have some method type, or it should have some body. So there is some optional things are there, and there are mandatory things is also there. So that you have to mention. So I'm creating my URL request with the help of NSURL request class. So NSURL request with URL. This is one of the method. You have to bind your URL which you want to attach as a request. So what do you want? Allows the cellular access or not? Means like either you want to download this thing on Wi-Fi, or you can allow the same download with your mobile network. So how you want? There are certain methods you can configure it. Set allow cellular access or not. So like NSURL connection, this is the API class. You can use a method connection with request. So this is on asynchronous method. So if you call this method, then it will start a background connection for the specific request from your client to server. So then you can specify your delegate class which needs to get the update what's going once you initialized a request from your client to server. So what happened, whether is it successfully reached or failed or something like that. So you can create your one delegate protocol class, or so which can observe this whole process of the NSURL connection. So this is where like you have to configure. So if you see, this is your delegate and my URL request. connection. As I said, this is your URL connection format, request format. This is to sending a connection, just making a connection to your server. So if you won't write this line, so it won't connect to your request. It cannot send a request to your server. So this is the basic thing. But when coming to this NS URL session, so how it is configured, the NS URL session is also have its own protocol. So delegation it should be there. But if you observe, so how it is separated from NS URL connection to session. So first NS URL session will be configured with a session configuration. So there is a API class is NS URL session configuration. So at the time of configuration, we specify whether this service is session is needs a cache or cache storage or cookie storage. So do you want it or not? So you can configure with NS URL session configuration. So you can create a singleton object with default session configuration. So if you create a one session configuration with the default session configuration object, so it is similar to your NSURL connection. So how your connection worked, then it works in the same fashion. There is no difference. I'm saying that NSURL session with configuration. I did like I appended the configuration, and I would like to see how the URL system is working. So I can create one of the delegate class, and I can assign this. For delegate, I can send the reference. So this reference is will have some certain methods which will be called automatically based on the status. So delegate queue, you have to run the whole process in one queue. So you can add one operation queue which monitors this service data processing, this thread processing. So the same thing, string. So I would like to do with one data download. So I can create one data task with HTTP GET request. So this is like one GET request which do simple data download. So for that I'm creating one data task. Then you have to resume this task. So if you resume the task, then it will start downloading. So this is the way, like the basic way of implementing NSURL sessions comparing to NSURL connection. So it supports the configuration supports TLS protocols or cell usage or network service type and storing cache cookies and credentials details and HTTP proxies and cookies pipelining headers. All these data can be configured with NSURL session configuration. So there are different ways of creating a session configuration. Default for access global and singleton storage, you can use default configuration. It's a singleton object. And private storage, if you want in-memory storage, then you can go for session configuration, referrals and session configuration. If you would like to go for out of process session configuration, keyed and like if you want to download something in the background, so you want some session needs to download in the background, then you have to create a configuration object with background session configuration. So this is the method. If you use this method to create an instantiation for NSURL session configuration, it means you want to create a session which runs in a background of the application. If your application goes for the background, it still works. So configuration objects are mutable but copied when accessed. So you want, then you can use the copy method. So these are the different three types of object creation for NSURL session configuration. So these three are singleton objects. You can create it and you can use it in a global way. So default configuration is similar to your NSURL connection. It stores some data on your disk. If you don't want to store something on your disk, then you can use a session configuration. Like you can use the second option to go for a session configuration. If you want to run something in the background mode as well, then you have to go for third option, is like background session configuration. So there you can specify an identifier place. You can give some your user defined name. This is out of process session. So this is in memory, this is disk memory, and this is like out of session. There are like three ways of session configuration. Based on the session configuration, we can say how your NSURL session is doing the download. So that we can. So this nsurl session task replaces your nsurl connection class, and it provides a status and progress properties. Means how much data is downloaded, what is the total size of data, how much is pending, that progress also. This task will give you an option to start a connection or stop a connection, or you can cancel it. You can do anything, like you can handle it. With nsurl connection, once you connected, you cannot cancel it. So but here in nsurl session task, there is an option to cancel and suspend and resume. So you can use this session task for data download, upload tasks provided to different. There is a difference for a data and upload and download tasks. And you can preserve your state also, which state you are. Is it still in download state, or is it resumed or suspended? What happened to your session task, that you can observe with your state. So it's having its own delegate methods, like whether you can identify the URL system events, whether it's downloading or it's downloaded, or whether it's completed or got an error or something. If these methods are inherited, so you can able to identify so how your URL system is working. If this method will be fired if you got an error, this method will be fired if you receiving the data, if your server is sending some information. So this data will be fine, did finish downloading. Once your data downloading is completely done, then this will come for this method, download task did finish downloading to URL. So these are like some certain delegate methods which returns you the details based on the specific event with the URL system. So nsurl session task, so this is the one of the subclass of nsurl session. It's having a 3 actions. It can cancel a task, suspend a task, resume a task. And there is the session task is having subclasses like data task. It's related to download data. There is a upload task through which you can upload some information to your server. There is a download task which is used to do something in the background download. Cancel by producing resume data as well. So what is the delegate methods? It's having its own delegate methods. Data task is having separate delegates, and download task will have separate delegates. These all are strongly referred and block based. And it's like a delegate messages. It's a delegate based and as well as block based. We can do the both ways. The session delegate, what are the methods it's having? nsurl session delegate. It uses 2 methods, like did receive authentication challenge, did become invalid authentication. For example, if your service is having one authentication, so you have to override did receive authentication challenge. So where you have to configure the authentication, base authentication. So like sometimes when you hit some server, it asks your user credentials. So it's nothing but there is some base authentication for it. So in such scenarios, you have to use the did receive authentication. And connection level authentication, there are referred, it can be your client SSL communication or TLS communication. So OAuth communication, they are the certain methods. And nsurl data delegate, what are the delegate methods it's having? So it's like allows you to turn download response. If your response, there is a method like did task did receive response completion handler. This completion handler block will be called once the response is completely done. It become download task. This did receive data. So this is like for every operation, these methods are task and event based related to session data. So if it is download data delegate, if you use like a nsurl session download task, if you use the download task, the download task is having some delegate methods. Did finish downloading to URL, or the total number of bytes is expected to write or expected to download it, and do you want to resume it or not, because since its download can done in the background, there the methods, delegate methods are different. So this is the way, like the basic thing it's is defined. You can create all asynchronous conventions with the API. If you see, the first step is to create your session configuration. Second step to create a session, and third one is like once you create a session, the third one you have to request the what type of task you would like to create. Either you would like to create a data task, or you would like to create an upload task or download task. That we will do it. Because first you have to configure, and later you have to create a session with a specific configuration. After that you have to you have to create a task. So your task will do all the things. Either download, as I said, the task is having three things. It can cancel, it can suspend, it can resume. There are three things it can do, the task. This is the way, like the whole nsurl system has been classified with different tasks of nsurl session with a basic configuration. So if you want to do a custom configuration, you can do it a custom configuration. This is as I said, like there are three ways of configuration object creation. If you want to create a configuration object, the configuration object will talks either your request is allows session storage or cookie storage or not, or disk storage, or whether the session is running in the background. All these details will be cleared with your session configuration object creation. So here we used nsurl configuration. It's a in-memory session configuration object. It cannot store anything on your disk. It's app level. And here I created my private session. You can use, I want to go with the data task with HTTP GET request, means like I would like to download something on GET method. So this method is having a data task with request with completion handler. If it is completed download, you will fire, this block will get executed. This block will contain arguments like data, response object, and error. If there is no error, you can use the data, because this is your data object which contains the whole data which is downloaded from this service. So it's like a simplified approach with an nsurl session to downloading a data.
Suresh,
Yeah,
that inferal inferal configuration means
yeah,
in memory.
yeah, I know.
Means once you kill the application,
Yeah,
uh, will not get that configuration, right?
no, it won't. It's like on based on demand. On demand, it cannot be stored. It won't be stored in your disk memory and disk. For example, if it is a default session, if you run at one time service, then it stores that cache data.
Yeah, right.
Though if second time if you go for, if the net is offline, still you will get the data because it's there in your disk. It's already there in your app.
Yeah.
So when you go for this Amperls configuration, it's like the customized. It won't it won't store any, it won't save anything in your disk. So if you run the second time, there is no net, then you won't get data.
Okay.
So
Okay.
there
Got it.
is some cache is there. There is nsurl cache, so it stores your data if you create with the default configuration object. So either you want to save, would like to allow something to save in the background, like in your cache, like in your disk memory or not. That depends based on your session configuration object. This is your private session configuration. If you go with this April configuration.
Uh, Okay. Okay. Got it.
So as I said, like the session will start with the task. The method is data task with HTTP request. You can use your URL, and there is a block completion handler. So this block will be fired if the data is downloaded successfully. So before that, you have to start your session task. Data task with URL. If you see that the same. See here, when you use with the data with HTTP request, if you're using the task convenience routines, no delegate required. Here the delegation is not required because it's run something in the background and it will give you the same block itself. You will get all the data by its block. And if you use like custom configuration, this is like with your data task with HTTP request. So how it's like this completion handler will returns you the data once it's download or if it got any error or exception. So this is like related to your data task. If you want to create a delegate based task, the previous one we have seen is like a block based method. Now we can see the delegate based. If you create any delegate based, we can use data task delegates. One is data task with request. It follows if you create one session object with data task with request, then it follows the delegate mechanism. If you use with HTTP request, this method it follows your delegate. Previously, this one is like a block based. Here you are giving the response request and you will get the response at here within the same method itself. If you use the method like data task with request, you bind the request object, then you have to implement all delegate methods, data task delegate methods, so that you can capture the data. This is synchronous and there is an asynchronous task convenience also. This is your asynchronous because this we use like a block based. Upload task is also having some certain methods. Upload task with request. What is your URL and what is your request? File based upload task with request from data. Either it can be your binary data, you can upload a direct binary data to server, or you can upload a file information to your server. Either file URL or direct data. So upload task with stream request as well. Like if you would like to do some upload streaming based, you can use this method. Either you want a file based or data based, then you have to use these methods, or if you want a stream based, then we have to use this upload task with request, because here every task is have a separate method to do it, and based on your requirement you have to choose which method you want to create a session task. So similarly, there is a download task with request, a task with resume data, and asynchronous download. This follows the same. So because the download background will follow the background transfer of session, download task will follow the background transfer, upload and download will follow the background transfer. So if we create a session configuration with identifier, it means you are creating something on the background. So it's still run in the background. Whenever that background data downloads was completed, so then it will gives you the progress, how much is completed and whether the session is resumed or stopped, that we can get it. Once the data download is done something in the background, then it will relaunches your application. It's like I said, if there is a session is created with a background session with identifier, then it runs out of process, means it will be handled by your operating system. So everything will get operated at end of the time, like it's for your OS, but this is out of your application. So it runs in the background, and once this session download was done, then automatically your app get launched again. Because if your application is minimized, still running in the background, there is some service download was done or upload was done, then it will be updated by an automatically opening. See, it opens your application is automatic way. It's something like you can relaunch it and you can reconnect it. Once it's completed, you will get back. I said it's like out of process transfers that we can do if you go with nsurl session nsurl configuration with a background identifier. Let's see a small example. I want to download some information in the background. Let's say I have one URL. I would like to download. I will tell you just only one procedure. I'm creating one shared session. I can go for it. This is my URL. If I have something URL, this is my data. First, we have to check whether the service is working or not. So I would like to download this data. So I created one class. I'm passing one URL object. How my class is created. I created one session. I used a method data task with URL and completion handler. It is a asynchronous block based. Let's run. So it needs to be resumed. If you resume, then it will start the data download. Here I'm creating. The shared session will allow you to store something on your disk space. It's related to nsurl session default configuration object. Now it's running in the background. So your data has been downloaded. You can see that. So this is your data. You can see this information. It's a bit of data. It's a download from your service. So this is the different approach which I have done